Welcome to Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. I'm Charlie Walters. I'm here in the studio with Kristie Ferrantella. She's one of the 6 men and women running for the Select Board of Nantucket at annual town election on April 9th, 2019. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
The mandatory question, why are you running?
So I grew up on Nantucket, born and raised, and I left for about a decade. And when I came back, I kind of was thrown into the housing crisis and really saw what Nantucket is from the perspective of a young professional. This really motivated me to get involved in the community, to support affordable housing, but also to become involved in our town government. And through this, I've been serving on our town scholarship committee. And while reading the applications of our 17, 18-year-old high school graduates, they're all saying they want to leave Nantucket to pursue their higher education and then return to the island to give back. And what I fear is if we don't take action to invest in the future of Nantucket, our Nantucket kids will not be able to return.
I think one thing everybody agrees on is there's an affordable housing crisis, but people differ as to what should be done about it. What do you think should be done about it?
I think the town needs to take action. So when I moved back here, my husband and I both are locals of Nantucket, born and raised, and we had trouble finding housing. With a great support network, 2 stable jobs, we bounced from house to house. We were getting ready to leave the island because we didn't feel that this was a viable place to live, to raise a family, to be part of the community. And I really think that we need to focus at all stages of the affordable housing crisis. Focusing on the state mandated SHI list is important to meet.
And the SHI list is?
The Subsidized Housing Inventory, SHI list. And that's obviously one of the biggest priorities of the Select Board so that we don't have to worry about outside developers, the 40B law. But we also need to focus at the higher income levels, the 100 to 150 to 200% AMI, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers, making sure that they have affordable housing. And, you're constantly told if you can't afford to live here, you should leave. But what would we do without those people supporting our community?
Now, there was an idea put forward to buy the Nantucket Inn, to have the town of Nantucket buy the Nantucket Inn. That idea is no longer on the table, but were it still on the table, would you support that idea?
If it were still on the table, I would support that idea, given we really do our background checking, data collection. I think one of the most important things that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is doing right now is a study with the Nantucket Data Platform to determine the different areas of need. So I would hate to see the town purchase a 100-unit condo, turn it into 39 units, say, of housing, and maybe that's not where the need in the community is. So really having some strong data to support the decisions that we're making. But I think the Nantucket Inn provided us with the opportunity to provide an elderly center, a community center that could brought the different generations together, and also meeting space for the town, which is something that the town desperately needs. So it kind of seemed like a slam dunk to put all of this together in one.
That leads me to something else. The town of Nantucket, as it stands now, has their offices scattered around in a few places, and that is the case for a lot of reasons. Is that a good idea, or would you rather see something centralized?
I would rather see something centralized. So I serve on the Town Government Study Committee, and our committee has taken some field trips off island to look at a few other towns in the Commonwealth to see different forms of government, just how different towns are run. And one of the things that we've noticed is in Barnstable and Falmouth, they're so open and welcoming. As soon as you walk in, there's somebody there to greet you and tell you which department, where they're located. There's a lot of parking, which is something Nantucket suffers from.
What's that?
Right. That's the one thing every member of the committee reported back on was how many parking spots there were. But just seeing that, I think that would invite people to become more involved and also reduce the amount of traffic, and thinking about when you're going to get so many permits, you're going to so many different locations all around the island. And if it was more centralized, it would just make our lives easier.
Let's stick with transportation for a minute. Again, everybody agrees there's a transportation problem, but not everybody agrees on how to deal with it. Would you support paid parking on Main Street, for example, just to throw an idea out?
I would support paid parking on Main Street. I know that that's a tough concept for a lot of us to digest. I've lived in the city for 9 years before moving back to the island. And when you're having to decide between paid parking or taking public transportation, I think most people are used to paying for parking. And it also gives you an incentive to use public transportation or bike or walk if you knew that there was going to be an expense if you drove.
We just started year-round public transportation this past winter. Do we have enough of that, do you think? Or too soon to tell, maybe?
I think it's a little too soon to tell. I think it'll become more popular the longer it's in place and the more that we're using it. Again, I'm always going back to data. That's kind of my background. The more that we can look at the paths and where people live on island, we might be able to provide better service routes. So where I was living prior to my current home, I was on Hussey Farm. And to get into town, easy 2-minute bus ride into town. But to go out and back home, I was taking a 45-minute loop around the island just to get back to my house. So I always took the bus to work and walked home, which is great in the summer, not so ideal for the winter. So having some laid out bus routes that go to where the people are, but also go back the same way like they do in the city. Right now, we just have these loops.
Does it make sense to try to discourage people from driving into town 2 or 3 times a day, discourage them from buying the biggest SUV on the market, that sort of thing?
Of course.
But how do you do that?
That's something that it's your free will. You can buy whatever car that you would like. I don't see a town policy that could really be implemented to reduce that, but I'd be open to hearing suggestions.
Downtown parking garage inevitably comes up when you're talking about traffic and transportation. What are your feelings on that?
I think if it's in the right spot, it can definitely be something that we could utilize in town. The idea of having it right on the harbor doesn't appeal to a lot of people. I liked the idea of a park and ride that's a little bit outside of town for people who work in town to be able to park and then take a free shuttle to their parking spot. That's been floated around a couple of times.
You mean having a garage outside of town or a parking lot or both? Or
both.
And where might that be? Land on Nantucket is hard to find, and
right.
Even if you do find it, it's expensive.
Yeah, it'd be something where we'd have to work and collaborate with other town resources. Is there any land bank land that we could work together, or another business that'd be willing to exchange land with the town?
Climate change has come to Nantucket most noticeably in the form of Easy Street being flooded or the Strait Wharf area being flooded. It used to hardly ever happen. Now it happens several times a year. Mm-hmm. What can Nantucket, or what should Nantucket do to alleviate this situation?
I think the Select Board has taken a stand in becoming focusing on coastal resiliency and making sure that we can bounce back after these storms. But I think we need to look at the different policies that are out there and get the experts to the island to determine how we can make our downtown more resilient to these storms.
And what might that involve, in your view? Would you prefer to see one method over another?
There hasn't been anything that I've looked at and said that's how we should move forward. I think I'm still learning as much as I can about the different topics regarding the town.
Tell us something of your background. You mentioned you grew up here, but you went away for a while. Where did you go? What do you do? What did you do?
Yeah, so I graduated from Nantucket High School, and I went off to Simmons College. It's now Simmons University in Boston. I studied math and economics, and I really was driven to study economics after growing up on Nantucket and seeing our seasonal economy and the fluctuations. And it really made me start to think, how do you make Nantucket a sustainable year-round economy that's not just focused on June, July, and August? And then I worked in the private sector for a little while in Boston. I was working for a data company that helped move employees around the world doing cost of living analysis. Again, always kind of coming back to my Nantucket roots, looking at cost of living differentials around the U.S. and Massachusetts and around the world. And then I went to graduate school at UMass Boston to pursue my master's degree in applied economics. And I focused a lot there on social justice and equitable economics. I was Then, sorry, I then went off to DC, where I started working at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and I was an economist for the U.S. government. And what I focused on is how each industry contributes to the U.S. economy and our national GDP, our gross domestic product. And what I loved about that job in DC was one of the satellite accounts I got to handle was how tourism affects the U.S. economy. And again, I always kind of felt this pull of Nantucket traveling with me wherever I went. And it was there in DC that my husband and I decided, we were engaged at the time, that we wanted to move back home. We wanted to be closer to family, and we really wanted to be involved in the community.
Let's apply some of your knowledge to what goes on down here. If you include building development as part of the tourist economy, certainly related, if not the same thing, that's most of what Nantucket's economy is. Mm-hmm. In your view, not as a Nantucketer, but as somebody who has studied economics in college, is that a good idea for Nantucket?
So it's not a long-term solution, a long-term sustainable. There's only so much you can build. There's only so much land, right? But right now, that's what we have, and that's what's contributing to our economy. So taking policies that would reduce building would hurt our economy in the short run. So I think while we're maintaining our current economy, we want to work to invest in infrastructure and ideas and how to support a different economy. Do we want to be, more focused on innovation and entrepreneurship and other things that could bring businesses to Nantucket versus just always focusing on hospitality?
Well, sooner or later, the last building lot will be built on, and the big question is, then what happens?
Right.
And of course, you talk to 10 different people, you get 10 different answers, but that will happen someday. Not in my lifetime, but very possibly in yours.
And that's really why I'm looking to step up and lead these conversations, because I'm lucky that I just purchased a condo on Nantucket, and I'm here to stay. My families are here, and we want to make sure that we have a sustainable economy, that it's a year-round economy. I think one of the most beautiful things that I've noticed from when I grew up here to living here now is I really felt that winter on Nantucket starting, kind of September 1st after Labor Day, all the way till basically July 4th. We were very quiet, and now you just see so many businesses staying open and restaurants and things to do for our kids. I think that's just a wonderful thing to see all my nieces and nephews having activities after school, multiple things to do, the ice rink, playing hockey. It's just that's a sustainable way to live.
Nantucket's population is growing and has been for decades. Lots of building going on, lots of renovation. You still see, I don't know what the exact figure is today, but it's several hundred people coming over to the island every day by boat or maybe by plane. There's a slight disconnect there that the population of the island is going up, and yet there aren't enough people here to do that work. Mm-hmm. Is that sustainable to have people commuting from the Cape?
No. So when I first moved back here and I was looking for a job on the island, I connected with the Nantucket Data Platform, and I was contracted with them to do the effective population study. So this is really what gets me excited, is data and the population of Nantucket. And what we found is there are about 300 people commuting back and forth to Nantucket. And when we interviewed these people, they come over on their boat with their lunch already packed. They go to work and then they leave. So that's wages being taken off of our island. They're not investing even in our restaurants, our food. But then they're also not having students go through our school system, and they're not paying taxes. And so how are we're supporting the workforce to leave the island and not stay here and be a part of the community. We don't see commuters serving on boards or being involved in town government or really giving back to the community the way that our year-round residents do.
I would think that would be a particularly difficult thing to do, to try to figure out the population, because given that we're a tourist economy, you might have somebody here who was, let's say, a waiter in a restaurant from April until stroll, and then they go and they ski or something all winter. They're here more than they are any other place, but they may not vote here. They may not technically be a legal resident. So there are a lot of people who maybe should be factored in who don't get factored in. What sorts of contortions do you have to do to factor those people into your data?
So we were always looking to count the number of people. And as much as we tried to distinguish between year-round and summer, it was always about just trying to know how many people are using our roads, using our infrastructure, and questions that the town was really interested in asking. And so when it comes to counting, it didn't matter if they were voting here or a legal resident. It was more just trying to say, well, if the fire department got a call right now, can they service the capacity of our island and our population? But I do think it brings up a good point that we have such a transient population that you're seeing people come and go so often that it is hard to get people to vote and be registered to vote here, which is something I think we should be working on.
Which leads me to town government. You're one of 6 people running for 2 spots on the select board. A lot of other elective offices don't have enough people running to fill the open spots. How do you turn that around? How does Nantucket encourage people to run for office?
Well, I think it's really going to start from the grassroots up. There's an organization called We Can, and it was founded for women engaged in civic action on Nantucket, but it supports women and men, just getting the word out there. And I think that's really helped get the word out to women to become involved in politics. And we had an event in January to encourage and talk about maybe why we feel barriers to run. And perhaps once we kind of get rid of these myths of why women can't run, we'll see more women running for select board, which right now we have 4. That's pretty amazing that we have 4 women. We've never seen this many women running.
Every spring there are a lot of commissions that have appointed people. And there's a similar problem. The number of openings and the number of applicants for those openings, it's about the same number. So if you're an applicant, you're probably going to be appointed. Again, with non-elective positions, would you give the same answer as to how to get people involved?
I think it's really just getting the word out there. So again, when I moved back, this is when We Can was founded, and they held an event to talk about all the different boards and commissions that were open. And it was somebody there at that event that said, why don't you run for scholarship or apply for scholarship committee, because you're somebody who received that scholarship in both undergrad and graduate school. It's a great way to give back. And if I hadn't attended that and known about it, I probably wouldn't have become as involved. So the more that we can spread the word, and it really comes to finding what you're passionate about. I was really passionate about bringing education opportunities to Nantucket high school students, and that directly aligned with the scholarship committee. So if you're really passionate about coastal resilience, join one of the committees focusing on that. If you're really passionate about parking, join the parking commission, and if we create one, and so it's just really finding what people are passionate and then encouraging them to get involved.
The position you're running for is paid barely, but it's still a part-time board, and always has been as far as I know. Is that still a good idea for Nantucket, to have a part-time select board?
That is the current structure that we have, and I've heard that it's more so a full-time job. But I think as we are investigating different forms of government, this is one of the tasks of the town government study. We're taking into consideration that we have a growing population of 17,000 people, and perhaps a representative town meeting, which again would still have a select board, might be a route to go down.
And for those who might not know, how would a representative form of town meeting work?
So representative town meeting would be split up. Nantucket would have different zones or different kind of districts, and each one would be represented by one person. So you would elect the person to represent you at town meeting. So say we have, I'm going to say Falmouth as an example, they have 250 representatives to represent all of their districts. And then when they go to town meeting, anybody can stand up and talk and give their opinion, and it's still very focused on having the full community and voters involved. But then when it comes time to vote, only those that are elected can vote. So they have the 250 elected representatives voting on their subjects.
And how many voters does Falmouth have? Do you know that number?
No, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Just trying to figure out how it compares to Nantucket.
Yeah.
So people could go to the meeting, they just couldn't necessarily vote?
It's very similar to our non-voting taxpayers.
Right now, there are, I thought it was 8,000. Somebody told me it was closer to 10,000 registered voters on Nantucket. The high school auditorium where annual town meeting takes place holds, I think, 800 people.
Correct.
So you can fill up the room and you still have 90% of the voters who cannot show up. I don't know what you do about that because I don't know where there's a bigger space, but is that the best way to run town government?
I don't think so. And what they've done in the past, if there's been more people showing up, is they've opened up the auditorium or the gymnasium.
Yes.
But it's, again, still is not going to hold the 10,000 voters. And so you're almost discouraging people from showing up and participating in our town government. They are looking into other resources. We've been looking at electronic voting, which, again, you still have to come and be present because you need to prove that you're the voter and you're there to vote. So it, again, doesn't solve the space issue, but some people feel that if they could vote electronically, they might show up.
Does changing voting day on Nantucket to Saturday make any sense to you as a way of getting people to come?
I don't think that that would make a ton of a difference, only because there's so many working families on Nantucket that they're still working on Saturdays.
Energy. We have 2 cables connecting us to the Cape. When I was younger, there were 0 cables. There's now talk of a 3rd cable. There are a couple of facilities here. I don't know exactly how many that use geothermal. Tidal, one never hears about. Wind, we do hear about from time to time. Where do you think Nantucket should be headed as far as energy sources go?
I definitely think that we need to look at alternative energy sources. I don't want to see a 3rd cable be installed. I think National Grid has done a great job raising public awareness about this issue and trying to prevent that 3rd cable. I have been attending the Vineyard Wind information sessions and trying to learn as much as I can about that. There are things that I agree with where you don't want to take away from the beauty of Nantucket. And while you want to preserve Nantucket, that part of that preservation is adapting to 21st century technology and innovative energy sources. So I would be in favor of bringing alternative wind or alternative energy to Nantucket to help us, stay up to date in the 21st century.
I know you're running for select board and not HDC, but I'll ask you this anyway. Should people be allowed to use solar paneling in the old historic district, for example?
That's a really tough question, and I've been thinking about this a lot. As I had mentioned earlier, my husband and I had just bought a condo, and because it's a condo, we can't install solar panels on our roof because we don't own that part of the building. And it made me start thinking about how do we encourage other developers and other builders to use solar panels. And again, you start thinking about you want to preserve the historic district. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's other ways to incorporate more efficient energy without distorting the way it looks downtown.
And talking about downtown, a lot of people have complained in recent years that the provisions in entertainment licenses have not been enforced. I'm going to be neutral on this, but some people say, well, that television and bar X is visible on the street, or there are too many decibels coming out of this establishment and so on. Is there enough enforcement? Is there enough, are there enough restrictions being placed on entertainment licenses for downtown?
I think there are enough restrictions. I would agree that the enforcement hasn't always been there. It's something that people have brought to the town government study committee that they don't feel that enforcements have been followed through. And we've been investigating how you make that somebody's job? Who's responsible for enforcing those restrictions? And you don't want to lose the downtown feel, but you also don't want to lose what's attracting tourists. So you're kind of walking this balance of if you're enjoying going to Tree Bar and listening to music outside, is that taking away from your dinner somewhere next door? So you're always trying to kind of walk that fine line.
Fertilizer is another flashpoint for many people because we have regulations or guidelines, whatever the proper term is, in place. But again, how do you make sure that somebody is not letting their fertilizer end up in the harbor? Is there enough overseeing of that area?
That's something I haven't looked into, but I would definitely want to look into a little bit more.
And sticking with the harbor is one of those places. It isn't just about the fertilizer. It's about emptying your tanks from a yacht. It's about keeping Children's Beach clean. It's about the scallop industry. Incorporating all those other things I just brought in. Would you be in favor of more people policing those areas of the town?
Definitely. I really think that we need to protect our water. We want to have clean water to swim in if you're at Children's Beach. You also don't want to destroy the fishing or scalloping that's so vital to our economy.
And of course, money has to pay for all of this stuff. Are real estate taxes too low on Nantucket?
That's what draws people to Nantucket. And, I got asked this last night if I would ever increase real estate taxes. And, we're a board of 5. I'm not going to do anything independently by myself. But you want to walk the fine line where you don't want to raise the real estate tax and disrupt the economy in the sense that people don't want to come and invest here or purchase a second home here. But we also have a lot of expenses. So there's got to be other ways, like a real estate transfer tax. So when you're buying and selling the property, is there any way that we can recoup some dollars there?
So you see, to jump ahead a little bit, you see growth in Nantucket's future, but wise growth is what you're after. You don't want to shut the door and say nobody else can come.
No, and I don't think that is a responsible way to look at the island. When I look at the island, I worked in the nonprofits. We rely on our visitors and our second homeowners to sustain the Athenaeum, the NHA, the Dreamland, even our hospital. So we're very ingrained we always want to distinguish ourselves between the year-round community and the seasonal community, and we're so intertwined, and we really need to realize that we're working together because we all love Nantucket.
Kristie Ferrantella, thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Best of luck with your campaign. And don't forget to vote on April 9th and go to town meeting on April 1st. For Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18, I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for joining me. Tune in again.